Black-bellied and gentle, doting and teasing occasional green tea female lead, passionate, sincere, and pure-hearted actress protects short bomb male lead. Bai Luoyan died once and entered modern society. I thought the pain of the past slowly faded away, until a thunderbolt chopped the white falling smoke back in the past. When nothing had happened yet. She realized that she had been deceiving herself all along. Pain will pass, but harm will endure forever. Start your career, seize the opportunity with white smoke, and do well. Snatching the business of scum men, uniting with their opponents, digging holes in the dark, and using their own strength to stir up the chaos in Anjing. But why is the scumbag's woman looking at her more and more out of place? When it comes to emotions, falling smoke is a headache. Due to an accident, they swapped bodies with Zhuma, and the two had plenty of jokes. Faced with the scumbag's pua, Su Ziyu maintained her feminine identity in stable output. There are so many men, I don't want you alone. Faced with oppression, Su Ziyu had a fierce look in her eyes and was eager to give it a try. I'm a woman now, can I beat her up? Can I? Every day, she steadily goes crazy and feels startled by the white falling smoke. The mental state of Zhuma seems to be ahead of her for hundreds of centuries. In her past life, Su Ziyu protected her for a lifetime, so heaven sent her back to repay her kindness. Just. Bai Luoyan, this is a revenge. Su Ziyu, with a big belly and red eyes, pointed at Bai Luoyan and cursed angrily. Don't be angry, it's still you who will feel uncomfortable if you experience fetal pressure later. Bai Luoyan hugged the person into her arms. Chapter 1. Soul returns to hometown. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Front row highlighted. Male and female lead body swapping. The male lead is pure and passive, while the female lead has a dark belly and takes the initiative. The main plot revolves around emotions, and the plot is overwhelming. Don't insult me if you don't like it, just click on the top left corner. The following text, thank you for reading. The thin sunlight peeked out from the clouds, and the early summer sky had a hint of dryness and heat. Bai Luoyan stepped on his slow steps, and his high heels made rhythmic sounds, like a beautiful symphony. Mr. Bai is good. Mr. Bai is early. Good morning. Bai Luoyan nodded slightly in response to the greetings. Along the way in his 27th year in this world, Bai Luoyan had already integrated into modern society. Born into a middle-class family, she received a good education from a young age and was amazed by modern civilization while quickly acquiring knowledge. I started my business at the age of 23 and now I have achieved some success. Ding! The elevator door opened, and Bai Luoyan quickened his pace. His skirt lifted and he walked with a gentle breeze. Just as I sat down in the office, the door was knocked on. Assistant Yuan walked in holding a pile of documents. Good morning, Mr. Bai. Here are the documents you need to handle today. There will be a meeting at 10 p.m. and a negotiation meeting at 2 p.m. Mr. Feng has arranged for you to go to the Dian Club tonight. Bai Luoyan nodded and said, I understand. You go ahead and get busy first. Okay, please let me know if you have anything to do. The working hours are always exceptionally long, and Bai Luoyan is flipping through documents one by one. The sky outside the window suddenly darkened, and dark clouds rubbed against the morning light, causing wind and rain to come. Bai Luoyan's eyebrows furrowed tighter and tighter, and his restlessness surged up in his heart. I put down the file and rubbed my brows, feeling a flurry of palpitations. With a thunderous roar, Bai Luoyan stood up in shock. Stepping towards the window, it was already drizzling outside. Raindrops stick to the window, leaving traces. The thunder seemed to be louder, and silver-purple lightning shuttled through the clouds. Thunder fell one after another, seemingly getting closer and closer to the white falling smoke. The unease in his heart grew stronger and stronger. Bai Luoyan looked at the lightning dancing wildly in the sky and reached out to pull the curtain. As soon as his fingertips touched the curtain, a thigh-thick lightning bolt struck straight at him. Bang! Wow! Bai Luoyan's eyes turned black, and intense pain instantly spread throughout his body. In the corner of her eye, she seemed to see her gray hair falling off. The screams were incessant, and the glass window shattered all over the ground. At the moment of falling, Bai Luoyan vaguely heard Yuan's helpless cries. I don't know how long it took, but the sharp pain seemed to be rapidly fading and slowly concentrating on the brain. The nerves were twitching with pain, and Bai Luoyan struggled to move. A faint aroma lingered around his nose, not unpleasant but familiar to his bones. White falling smoke. You'd better explain what's going on. The deliberately lowered voice was full of anger, but still inadvertently revealed a hint of feminine charm. My gaze gradually became clearer, and Bai Luoyan saw the woman in front of me clearly. 3,000 strands of green hair were loosely gathered, with a slight drop of hair on the forehead. Her fair face turned slightly red from anger, and her retro and beautiful apricot eyes stared round, resembling a cat with hair blown out. A small and slender nose, red lips and white teeth, beautiful and charming. Bai Luoyan stared blankly at the person in front of her, her mind blank. Has her soul left her body? How do you see yourself sitting across from talking? Is the power of a thunder so great? Bai Luoyan stretched out his hand in a daze, wanting to touch his body, but was mercilessly knocked down by Su Ziyu. Perhaps Bai Luoyan's expression was too unbelievable. Su Ziyu pursed her lips and frowned, asking, "What's wrong with you?" Bai Luoyan opened her mouth and said, "I." A flood of memories surged in, and Bai Luoyan suddenly froze her body. Is she back in her first life again? Standing up in a daze, Bai Luoyan spun around the room and then rushed to the bronze mirror. The person in the mirror is tall and jade standing, dressed in a dark purple prince's robe, with fair and delicate skin, deep and beautiful facial features, and a pair of blue eyes like treasures in the deep sea, mysterious and charming. What an unfamiliar familiarity. Su Ziyu. Bai Luoyan blurted out. Why? The crisp female voice came from behind. Bai Luoyan turned around abruptly, his tone full of shock. What's the situation with us? Are you asking me? Su Ziyu patted the table and stood up, feeling even more aggrieved than her. You asked me to drink with you, I drank. After drinking, it turned out like this. Can you explain what situation would be more appropriate? Bai Luoyan fell silent for a moment, trying to search for his memories. Bai Luoyan was an illegitimate daughter. Her father was Bai Zhan, the Minister of Rites, and her mother came from a humble background. She passed away at the age of 8. She has not been favored since childhood, but the mother of the Bai family is not difficult for a child, and Bai Luoyan has grown up stumbling and struggling. Just as her facial features slowly grew, the white falling smoke became more and more beautiful, making all the women in the White Mansion feel a sense of crisis. Her life became exciting as a result. Su Ziyu was the 7th prince of northern Qin, with half of his foreign bloodline. When he was born, lightning and thunder caused wildfires in the outskirts of the city. He was deemed by the imperial censorate to be possessed by evil energy and was not suitable to be raised in a deep palace. He grew up living with his mother in the Huayan Temple in the suburbs of Beijing until he was 15 years old, when he was summoned back to the palace and granted the title of King Qi, but had no fiefdom. The degree of favor can be seen from this. Bai Luoyan and Su Ziyu have known each other since childhood at Huayan Temple, and can be considered childhood sweethearts. After Su Ziyu returned to the palace, the two secretly supported each other. In his previous life, Bai Luoyan's love for the second prince Su Ziki was not a secret. The open customs of the northern Qin dynasty, and the courage of women to express their love, were not surprising. Thinking of this, Bai Luoyan instinctively glanced at Su Ziyu. In her previous life, she caused too many deaths to pursue Su Ziki, and Su Ziyu was the one she owed the most. This time, I brought someone over to drink because Su Ziki wanted to take the concubine, which made Bai Luoyan feel very uncomfortable. Although she was a concubine, the other party's brother was a highly appreciated academician from the Hanlin Academy, so Su Ziki did not dare to neglect him and specifically requested a wedding banquet. But there was no such thing in my past life. Bai Luoyan looked at the person across from him. With the same face and a different soul, the whole person's temperament has undergone a great change. Bai Luoyan is a relatively quiet person, while Su Ziyu is a restless person, and even this face seems to come to life. Bright eyes and white teeth, looking forward to the divine flight. You're talking. What are you doing staring at your own face all this time? Su Ziyu wanted to explode again, and Bai Luoyan hurriedly said, I'm not sure what's going on. Don't you get excited yet? Don't you think this is quite fun? Fun. Su Ziyu almost didn't come up in a breath. Where the hell is fun about this? Do you want me to help you chase my second brother with your body? Don't worry, why don't we have a few more drinks and see if we can exchange them back? Bai Luoyan comforted. It's really pointless. Su Ziyu chose to listen to Bai Luoyan's nonsense. At the bottom of a jar of wine, Su Ziyu's face turned red like cooked shrimp, and her once agile big eyes were now blurred and unable to focus. He was drunk and Bai Luoyan looked at the person making a fuss in her arms. Bai Luoyan is so unremarkable. If someone takes a concubine, you will be so sad. Su Ziyu came up and wanted to pinch her face, but was firmly held down by Bai Luoyan. Bai Luoyan felt another warm body in his arms, and his tense body gradually relaxed. There are countless thoughts surging in my mind, but my heart is truly calm. Like a torn person, she unconsciously holds onto the person in her arms, like holding onto a lost treasure. The conversation just now was completely completed subconsciously, and Bai Luoyan has not actually recovered from it yet. At this moment, the stimulation of alcohol made Bai Luoyan's thoughts even more chaotic, accompanied by a faint pain in his forehead. The deliberately overlooked memories flooded back, leaving a deep impression on the heart. How could it be forgotten? How can the body's protective mechanism be so unreasonable? The glamour of modern life made Bai Luoyan feel even more despicable. She half lowered her eyelashes, suppressing the darkness inside and sorting through the past. Chapter 2. Past. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The country where Bai Luoyan lives is called Northern Qin. Today, the world is divided into 5 parts, with Northern Qin occupying the central inland region and its territory extending all the way to northern Xinjiang. It has a wide area, a large population, strong military strength, and abundant resources, making it the leader of the world. The northwest border of Northern Qin borders Xiling and is guarded by 13 tribes. The southeast is rich and is the economic center. The political center is located in Anjing, with a pleasant climate. As the capital city, Anjing's imperial power is immeasurable, and the trend of extravagance is even more prevalent. Speaking of Bai Luoyan, no one in Anjing knows. Without him, just chasing after the second prince of Northern Qin for the first 3 years would be enough for people to talk about it for a long time. The second prince of Northern Qin, Su Ziki, is as gentle as jade and has a grand appearance. Her mother, the virtuous consort, and the current emperor are a young couple with a deep friendship. My maternal grandfather was the current grand tutor, who was full of peach and plum blossoms, and also the teacher of Su Ziki. Su Ziki has been intelligent since childhood, able to read at the age of 6, write poetry at the age of 8, and write a famous essay titled, On Public Security, at the age of 14. The second prince himself is gentle and courteous towards others, affectionate but not promiscuous. He is the dream lover of countless women in the imperial court of Anjing, and the former Bai Luoyan is also one of them, even more insane. Crazy enough to give up the most important chip in one's hand. The silver wild goose pavilion, founded by Bai Luoyan, was so majestic that its influence spread throughout the court and the rivers and lakes. Unfortunately, the lord himself is not clear-headed. He personally peeled off his armor and put on that gentle skin. He was calculated step by step to become the canary in the deep courtyard, and the silver goose pavilion was handed over to Su Ziki. Bai Luoyan was placed under house arrest by Su Ziki in the backyard, truly isolated from the world in front of that beautiful pet. However, Bai Luoyan's mind was once bad, firmly believing that this was Su Ziki's love for her, and it was the man's innate possessiveness that caused it. Su Ziki would come to see her regularly, occasionally giving her valuable and exquisite gifts, and sending exquisite pastries every day. When she later discovered that these pastries were mixed with addictive substances like cold food powder, Bai Luoyan had already eaten them to the bone. Later, Su Ziki ascended the throne and carried a large sedan chair to marry Qi, the daughter of the Prime Minister. Anjing 13th Street, red makeup 10 miles. Fengguan Shepe, dragon soaring and phoenix soaring. Bai Luoyan was enfeoffed as a concubine. It was not until then that she could see clearly the underlying male chauvinism of Su Ziki. I felt that she was restless, so I placed her under house arrest. Suspected of having an affair with Su Ziyu, felt unclean, so never touched her. It's ridiculous and absurd. The 3 cardinals and 5 virtues, as well as the women's ring, have always been sneered at by Bai Luoyan. No wonder Su Ziki doesn't like her. Just pretending for too long, wearing a mask too firmly, Bai Luoyan once forgot what he looked like. Stubbornness and unwillingness ultimately led to such a fate. After ascending to power, Su Ziki no longer concealed his ambitions, carried out extensive reforms, cleaned up courtiers, and the people in the court changed wave after wave. Perhaps still reciting Bai Luoyan's feelings, Bai Luoyan was not abused in the palace. But what's wrong with Su Ziyu? Bai Luoyan's emotions surged, only feeling suffocated. Su Ziyu has a pure and kind-hearted personality. Although sometimes she has a hot temper, she always protects her with sincerity. Back in the day, he kowtowed step by step to beg his mother's acceptance of her, only to say to her, "I want to marry Su Ziki with the wind, the scenery, and the light." Bai Luoyan still remembers Su Ziyu's broken head and blood flow, and never forgets to fulfill his promise to her, "In the future, you will also have a strong family to support you." A bright smile, very smelly, but also very dazzling. After Su Ziki ascended to power, he changed his previous gentle appearance and harmed his limbs in order to consolidate his position. And if Su Ziyu gets involved with her, there won't be any good outcome. The 180,000 members of the Tulang tribe were accused of rebellion, and Su Ziki spared no effort in deploying 300,000 elite soldiers to strangle Su Ziyu's mother tribe. Blood flows for thousands of miles, a scene of sadness. At that time, Bai Luoyan had already become addicted to the bone marrow, and Su Ziki no longer delivered pastries every day. She had already lost all her energy in energy, and when she heard this news, she couldn't even squeeze out any sadness or anger. Numb and hollow, as if dying the next second. After dealing with the aftermath, Su Ziki completely ignored Bai Luoyan and reconciled with his Empress Qin and Sei, creating beautiful stories. So he didn't know that Su Ziyu, who was supposed to die in the western regions, quietly appeared and accompanied Bai Luoyan through the difficult days of quitting addiction. Su Ziyu lost all her martial arts skills, but climbed back to Bai Luoyan's side with a body full of rotten bones and flesh. In the end, they were reported and exposed, and the two were imprisoned. Bai Luoyan watched helplessly as Su Ziyu was sentenced to 18 extreme punishments and ultimately died in her arms. Originally, he was a carefree body, but his pride was broken by a beautiful woman. Bai Luoyan went crazy. Until he woke up for a quarter of an hour later, without hesitation, he chose to end his life. Holding Su Ziyu's bones, dying without closing her eyes. In fact, she didn't even know what feelings Su Ziyu had towards her until she died, perhaps even Su Ziyu herself didn't know. His actions surpass friendship and love, and he is more like a true family member, supporting himself without hesitation. After a long pause, Bai Luoyan regained consciousness and picked up the person in his arms. At the moment he stood up, he was quite surprised, realizing that his body was so light. Put the person on the bed and carefully tuck in the corner of the blanket. Her alcohol tolerance has never been good, but Su Ziyu is exactly the opposite of her. Unexpectedly, with this change of body, the drunken person became Su Ziyu instead. Opening the door, the once desolate courtyard was filled with vegetables, making it look full of vitality. In the courtyard, there is a jujube tree. It is the weather of early autumn, with a cool breeze. The jujube trees grow very well, and it is not in vain to smoke and endure the odor of fertilization. Bai Luoyan lives in a secluded courtyard of Bai Mansion, and there are usually no people to disturb her. Otherwise, Su Ziyu wouldn't dare to run here every day or two. In fact, the most important thing is that Bai Luoyan has never mistreated herself. The people in the small kitchen are all from the Silver Goose Pavilion, and their craftsmanship is top-notch. Su Ziyu's mouth has also been kept more and more cunning. According to the memory of the first life, Su Ziki now knows that she is the owner of the Silver Wild Goose Pavilion, but his influence has not yet infiltrated much. Bai Luoyan doesn't mind killing chickens and warning monkeys, just in time to rectify her subordinates and clear those who have ulterior motives. 3 days later is Su Ziki's wedding day, and she is going to join in the fun. But now that we have swapped bodies, everything needs to be discussed with Su Ziyu, so Bai Luoyan plans to cook a meal for someone. When the people in the small kitchen saw Su Ziyu, their face suddenly drooped. Aunt Su laughed bitterly and said, "Oh my lord, why are you here again? This kitchen has just been repaired, and it can't withstand any more harm from you. Can you please wait for it to be finished?" Bai Luoyan was stunned for a moment, then put on Su Ziyu's usual technique, blinked and stared at the person, softened his voice, and raised 3 fingers. "Last time it was an accident, I'm sure I won't miss it this time." "I swear," he said. Aunt Su obviously stopped following this trick, but couldn't resist Bai Luoyan's unblinking eyes as she looked at her. Those blue eyes were really beautiful, and Aunt Su couldn't hold them. She threw the vegetables in her hand into the basin and said, "Miss, I blame you for not being able to eat dinner. You have to bear it." Bai Luoyan's eyes lit up and he nodded incessantly. Then he escorted Aunt Su outside and slammed the door shut. Mrs. Su looked at the door panel, her face wrinkled, and her hands silently patted her thighs, shouting in her heart, "What a sin." As soon as the white smoke fell from the chest, he sighed inwardly that Su Ziyu's trick was really effective, and then he hurriedly got busy. When Su Ziyu woke up, the sun had already set in the west, and the remaining afterglow tinged the earth. For the first time experiencing the feeling of being drunk, Su Ziyu had a severe headache, and even though she woke up, she still hadn't changed it back. Su Ziyu couldn't help but feel angry. "The pearl hairpin on my head has been unloaded clean, and I think only Bai Luoyan is so considerate. As soon as I got out of bed, I opened the door and saw Aunt Su leaning against the jujube tree, feeling helpless. She kept banging her head against the tree, and the ground was scattered with a few fallen dates." Su Ziyu was not sure what had happened, but it didn't stop him from swaying in front of Aunt Su. "Auntie, what are you doing here without cooking? Your method of picking dates is quite cumbersome." Mrs. Su was startled and saw that it was her own young lady. She didn't care about his teasing and quickly said with a bitter face, "Miss, go take a look. Don't let the prince blow up the kitchen again later. You don't know the prince's cooking skills, don't hurt yourself again." As the prince himself, Su Ziyu narrowed his eyes and smiled amiably. "Why do you still let the prince into the kitchen if you don't like him so much?" Mrs. Su choked and pondered on how the prince, who did not speak of martial arts and relied on his beauty to commit crimes, could be a mortal-like woman. Chapter 3. Bathing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Su Ziyu looked at a large bowl of noodles on the table, looked up at Bai Luoyan, and then looked down at the noodles, habitually disgusted. "Did you cook a bowl of noodles all afternoon?" "No, It's mainly this. Bai Luoyan picked up the milk tea next to him. You definitely like it. After speaking, he turned his head to look at Aunt Sue and smiled obediently. Aunt, there's still some in the kitchen. You can also go and taste it. All right. Aunt Sue was flattered and quickly nodded before going down. Whether you can eat it or not, you have to accept what the master rewards. Su Ziyu poked at the noodles with chopsticks and looked at Bai Luoyan with concern, feeling that she might be on the verge of losing her mind. Are you okay? Marrying a concubine has dealt you such a blow. I almost forgot about this batch of white falling smoke. Ziyu, I. Bai Luoyan sighed and pursed his lips a few times, trying to say something but with a look of difficulty speaking. Su Ziyu looked at her quietly, waiting for a long time but not until later. With just a throw of chopsticks and a glare of apricot eyes, she said fiercely, "Speak up." Bai Luoyan was not doing much, but Su Ziyu was startled by her own voice. She was delicate and soft, with a hint of anger, like a mischievous and angry little lady. Su Ziyu's face suddenly burned and she became angry with embarrassment, saying, "What a loud voice you're making." The emotions that had finally been brewing were interrupted, and Bai Luoyan felt that he was unreasonable. My voice was as clear as a lark, he said. You're really shameless, Su Ziyu sarcastically added a touch of personal emotion. I want to go to Su Ziki's wedding banquet. Bai Luoyan pulled back his almost drifting emotions, his expression low, but his tone unusually firm. Su Ziyu frowned and said, "What are you going to do? Are you being laughed at?" I just wanted to cut off my last thought, I don't want to like him anymore. Bai Luoyan's eyelashes drooped and he pinched his thigh hard, forcing his voice to choke. If you're laughed at, then you're laughed at. I don't care anymore. With a facade, Bai Luoyan wished to immediately tell the world that she was no longer in love with Su Ziki. We need to deal with this matter immediately, so as not to easily tie her and Su Ziki together in the future. Can you really let go? Su Ziyu said dryly, actually, you worked hard to get married and become a legitimate wife. Aren't you letting the people in the backyard take care of you? Anyway, you're tough enough. Bai Luoyan shook his head and didn't react for a moment. The emperor bestowed marriage, who dares to provoke it? Su Ziyu snorted and said, aren't you still thinking of marrying him? Bai Luoyan choked and said softly, yes, I don't know if he's willing to marry a man. He gently shook his sleeve and pretended to straighten his hem. How did your emotions change so quickly? Su Ziyu compromised. What do you want me to do? Taking a sip of milk tea, Su Ziyu's eyes lit up with a swoop, a rich milk aroma mixed with a faint tea aroma, creating a delicate touch on her tongue. He couldn't help but squint his eyes, like a cat stealing the fishy food. Come with me and break this bad relationship. Su Ziyu didn't immediately agree. He put the cup on the table and looked down at Bai Luoyan with a straight face. You also said that this is a marriage bestowed by the emperor, and the emperor's fate is inevitable. What if Su Ziki is unwilling? Have you really thought of it? I've been following him for 3 years, do you think he responded to me? Even if he's stubborn, he should have understood. And this wedding banquet was personally requested by Su Ziki. Bai Luoyan shook his head and took a sip of milk tea. The woman married only once in her life, and requested the emperor's permission for her son to hold a wedding banquet for Huaner. This sentence was told to her by the palace detective, and even Bai Luoyan seemed to be able to see Su Ziki kneeling on the main hall pretending through it. After all, since then, Su Ziki has gained another reputation in Anjing. After a long silence, Bai Luoyan looked up and saw Su Ziyu staring at the milk tea in her hand with an unpleasant expression. That's mine. Staying with Su Ziyu always seems to make you jump off the hook. Bai Luoyan chuckled lightly, feeling a hint of lightness in his heavy heart. What's going on? Do you have any evidence to prove that it belongs to you? He raised his cup and took a few more sips. Su Ziyu pointed to her and said, you're a person. It's even more delicious to have been exposed to someone else's saliva, isn't it? You girls from all walks of life don't know how to pay attention. Bai Luoyan didn't care, anyway, it's my own saliva. And now you're the girl's family. Su Ziyu twisted and picked up chopsticks, fiercely mixing the mixed noodles. The topic came back to her and she said, "This is your attitude of seeking help and handling affairs." Bai Luoyan let out a long voice and said, "Oh, without being threatened, I love to help or not. Anyway, only I can do this thing, dot." Su Ziyu endured humiliation and forced out a smile. "How can we call for help? That's what I should have done. Don't worry, after finishing the task, I'll give you a whole bucket. If the pigs can feed you enough, I won't believe you're not drinking enough. If you can't speak, just shut up." After such a commotion, they were really hungry. The two of them sucked on the crumpled noodles and finally quieted down to finish dinner. The sky had completely darkened, and the moon quietly climbed up to the sky. The pure white light spread hazily, casting a white veil over the night. The two of them were walking and eating in the yard as usual, and the night always brought melancholy. Su Ziyu stared blankly at the moon and said, "How can we exchange it?" Bai Luoyan didn't know how to answer and could only remain silent. "White falling smoke, How do I take a shower?" The servants had already prepared hot water, and the two of them stood next to the huge bathtub, with the permeated steam enveloping the stiff two. The maid Lanji looked at the two and hesitated to speak. It wasn't until Bai Luoyan waved his hand to make someone step back that he couldn't bear to say, "Prince, although I know you and my young lady are innocent and our relationship is stronger than gold, I'm afraid it's not appropriate for you to stay here now, right?" Dot. Dot. A sentence silenced the two of them, and Su Ziyu glanced at Bai Luoyan, then at Lanji. Finally, she sighed and said, "It's okay, you can go down first." Lanji widened her eyes and said, "Mississippi. Go down." Su Ziyu spoke strongly. "Yes," Lanji bowed and reluctantly retreated. "Come on," Su Ziyu took a deep breath, feeling a familiar awkwardness. "Actually, you don't need to do this, and I don't need you to take responsibility," Bai Luoyan explained as he looked at him with a bitter and resentful expression. "What are you saying?" "I'll tell you, some stinky men's problems are just how you get used to them." Su Ziyu hated iron for not becoming steel and wished to poke her head and curse. Bai Luoyan quickly held him down and said, Okay, I will definitely pay attention in the future." The woman's clothing was complicated, and Su Ziyu honestly allowed Bai Luoyan to play with it. "Watch it, this knot just pushes and tugs here, and it opens." She lowered her head and carefully untied the knot on her clothes. The faint sandalwood fragrance wafted into her nose, and her focused expression was rare. Su Ziyu tilted her face slightly uneasily. Bai Luoyan noticed Su Ziyu's wandering gaze, his fingers twitched slightly, and he tied the knot again. "Come on, you untie one and I'll take a look." Su Ziyu, who didn't take it seriously, said, "Do it again." Bai Luoyan had no choice but to demonstrate again, and her patience with Su Ziyu completely refreshed her understanding of herself. Hand-in-hand teaching people how to solve, and also teaching people how to tie knots. Until only the last obscene pants and belly pockets remain. With a chill on her shoulders, Su Ziyu suddenly closed her eyes. Bai Luoyan couldn't help but curl his lips and reached out to grab his wrist, pulling it backwards. He placed his finger on the knot on his back and said in his usual tone, "This is easy to untie. You just need to pull this short rope and it will come loose. It's very simple. Remember to tie it this way when you wear it later, so you can take it off easily." Before Su Ziyu could react, Bai Luoyan had already taken his hand and untied it. He seemed to still feel the beat of that moment. Her brain crashed on the spot, and Su Ziyu stood there in a daze, tightly closing her eyes. Her mind was blank, afraid to move. White falling smoke. Su Ziyu was a bit lost, her brain spinning at high speed, almost drying up her own brain. He wanted to say something to ease his awkwardness, but in the end, he held back his head and squeezed out a sentence, "They're so heavy." As soon as she spoke, Su Ziyu wanted to slap herself twice and quickly stuttered, I don't mean anything else. You're just being honest." Bai Luoyan gritted his teeth before suppressing a smile and whispered, "Being a woman is very hard, especially for me who is so outstanding." Chapter 4. Blushing and Heartbeat. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Surrounded by hot water, Su Ziyu gently exhaled a breath. The curled eyelashes were soaked with steam, and Su Ziyu dared not open her eyes. "How do you wash with your eyes closed?" Su Ziyu swallowed, feeling more embarrassed than ever in her life. His restrained and hesitant demeanor is simply unsightly, and Bai Luoyan is helpless. After being baptized by modern thinking, she cannot say that she accepts this situation well, but at least she will not accept incompetence. At this moment, there is still a wonderful feeling of me teaching myself to take a shower. Bai Luoyan gently grasped Su Ziyu's hand, and the cold touch stimulated Su Ziyu's senses. Before she could react, her palm had already been touched by a soft spot, and a delicate touch came from her palm. After realizing what it was, Su Ziyu stood up like a cat with its tail stomped on. She shook her hands frantically, trying to shake off the indescribable touch. Her ears were red with blood, and she said, "What are you doing, Bai Luoyan?" Bai Luoyan looked at his delicate and seductive face, which was somewhat novel. When she had rarely been emotionally charged before, she had never been bullied like this before, with water droplets dripping down her body curves, teasing people who were helpless. "I'm not even shy, why are you shy?" Bai Luoyan asked seriously. She knew that Su Ziyu was innocent, but she didn't expect to be so pure. "And can't you clean up after taking a shower?" Bai Luoyan relied on his height advantage and pushed the person back into the bathtub. "Don't mess around anymore." Su Ziyu's mind was in disarray, just begging Bai Luoyan to let him go quickly. Bai Luoyan didn't stop and became serious. "Su Ziyu, what if your enemies continue to use the beauty trick like this in the future? Throw a few girls in your room without clothes, and you'll obediently surrender and capture them, won't you? And at this age, do you really know what's different between men and women?" said Su Ziyu, holding Su Ziyu's hand once again, ignoring his struggle and following his abdomen downwards. Su Ziyu's body froze fiercely, wanting to withdraw her hand but being firmly held down by Bai Luoyan. "You let go of me," Su Ziyu's body trembled. "What are you afraid of?" Bai Luoyan sighed lightly. "This place also needs to be cleaned. Taking a shower is like going to war, the water is almost cold before the two can come out." Su Ziyu's eyes were moist, with a slight redness at the corners, as if she had been angry. The blush on the cheeks was even more pronounced on the porcelain white face, with messy wet hair, resembling a vivid picture of a beautiful woman taking a bath. On the other hand, the white falling smoke looked light and clear, except for the sleeves that were wet with water, only those blue eyes had a darker color. The two of them left the bathroom, and Su Ziyu walked towards the bedroom wearing a coat, with Bai Luoyan calmly falling behind. "Dry your hair and don't catch a cold." Su Ziyu didn't know how to face Bai Luoyan for a moment, her heart was in a mess, her mind was full of physical structures. In the end, he was forced to keep his eyes open. It was Bai Luoyan who should have suffered losses, after all, this was her body. But Su Ziyu is just not good at anything. "I'm talking to you." Bai Luoyan reached out and tugged at him before Su Ziyu regained his senses and responded in a daze, "Oh." After seeing him respond, Bai Luoyan remained motionless and half bent down to look straight into Su Ziyu's eyes. "What's wrong with you? Is my body so ugly to you?" The voice was low, with a hint of caution. "No." Su Ziyu couldn't hear Bai Luoyan's tone the most, as if afraid that Bai Luoyan wouldn't believe him. Su Ziyu then said seriously, "It's not like that. How could Bai Luoyan miss this opportunity and insist on making people blush and heartbeat?" She smiled faintly, with a hint of vulnerability that had not been properly hidden, as if she believed that Su Ziyu was lying to her. "What is it?" "Not ugly." Su Ziyu's face burned again, but he persisted in saying, "Your body. It's very beautiful." He flickered his gaze and dared not look at Bai Luoyan. The voice behind him became quieter and quieter, but Bai Luoyan still could hear clearly. My eyes were filled with a smile. How could there be any trace of disappointment? "Really? Do you like it?" I couldn't help but continue teasing, but the smile in my voice couldn't be hidden. As expected, Su Ziyu's hair exploded again, her eyes wide open, and she rolled up her sleeves and was about to hit someone. "Can you show me that?" Running and chasing each other, the always peaceful courtyard exudes a lively atmosphere. The sky was getting late, and white smoke fell back to the palace. It's said to be the royal mansion, but there aren't many servants. Sneaking back into the room, I pushed open the door and met a resentful gaze. Wang Hao was the personal guard of Su Ziyu. He was originally an abandoned baby found in Huayan Temple, but later grew up with him. He was nurtured by Su Ziyu's mother and became the leader of Su Ziyu's side. Wang Hao has a tall figure and a handsome face, making him pretend to be Su Ziyu, which is quite decent. "You have finally returned, my lord." Wang Hao stood up, almost to tears. Who knows how difficult it is to pretend to be studying? Bai Luoyan touched his nose, feeling a rare sense of guilt. "It was indeed late today, thank you for your hard work. You should go down and rest first." Wang Hao clasped his fists and saluted, "Thank you for your understanding." There were too many things that happened on this day. Bai Luoyan lay in bed after taking a shower, recalling little by little. "Next is Su Ziki's wedding banquet, but we need to write a good script for Su Ziyu to memorize. Anyway, we need to draw a clear line between the two." In her previous life, although Su Ziki never directly responded to her emotions, she always happened to have the right time when she was about to give up, and tightly grasped the once white falling smoke. Lack of love. Too lacking in love. Bai Luoyan fiercely despised his former self. Nowadays, the initiative is in her own hands, and if Su Ziki knew at any cost, she didn't need to take the initiative to provoke. Just this throne, she will definitely not let him sit. Thinking about falling into a hazy sleep with white smoke, it may be due to overthinking, giving dreams an opportunity to take advantage of. The iron cavalry on horseback wielded a long sword, and wherever they passed, their heads fell to the ground. 180,000 people were besieged, with corpses scattered everywhere, and mournful cries lingering in their ears. The grass was getting redder and redder, almost overflowing. As I watched the blood red envelop me, Bai Luoyan couldn't move. In the blink of an eye, I saw Su Ziyu's broken body thrown into the wilderness, with several wild wolves burying their heads and gnawing on it. No. No. Bai Luoyan's eyes were about to crack, and his voice was weeping with blood. The blood-red water grew more and more until it reached the mouth and nose. Don't. Su Ziyu suddenly stood up, her heart rate too high. Su Ziyu closed her eyes and felt the tingling sensation in her body. Her face turned red and she felt regretful. How could you dream of such a thing? Stumbling off the bed, I poured a cup of herbal tea and slowly calmed down the strange feeling in my heart. "Miss, did you get up?" Lan Ji's inquiry came from outside the door. "Well, come on in." Lan Ji pushed the door open and walked in, with a tray of clothes in her hand. She walked inside and put down her things, saying to Su Ziyu, "Miss, do you want me to serve you?" "No need." Su Ziyu waved her hand to let her go down, and Lan Ji had already become accustomed to it. She bowed with good fortune. That servant went to urge breakfast. Su Ziyu changed into clothes, and the light pink color made the girl even more delicate. A silver bell and waist chain appeared playful around her waist, and a few small spirits were embroidered on the hem of her skirt, making her so delicate and charming. She casually tied her hair behind her, without applying any makeup, but with a color like the morning glow reflecting snow. Her skin was as smooth as cream, her lips were red and her teeth were white. Su Ziyu admired the person in the mirror and had to admit that Bai Luoyan's skin was indeed beautiful. After changing clothes, breakfast is also ready. Bai Luoyan has always disliked extravagance and waste, so breakfast is also simple. Su Ziyu lifted the hem of her skirt and sat down confidently, staring at Lan Ji for a moment. Su Ziyu picked up a meat bun first, and after taking a bite, she didn't feel too hot, so she picked it up with her hand. "Miss, you're really different today," Lan Ji said from the bottom of her heart. Su Ziyu's pouches were bulging, and he didn't refute her even when he heard this. "Isn't that nonsense in my heart? Can it still be the same if all the cores are replaced? Ah, it's really cute and unrestrained." Lan Ji looks at Su Ziyu and recalls that the hamster she used to raise is the same. Mississippi. Another maid, Guolan, hurriedly ran in. "Miss C is coming." Chapter 5. Invitation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What is she doing here? Su Ziyu frowned. There are 4 young ladies in the Bai family. The 4th young lady, Bai Yunqing, is a legitimate second daughter from the legitimate family. Growing up pampered by others since childhood, I have been raised with arrogance and recklessness, suffering from a noble woman's illness. Sister, I'm here to send you clothes. Bai Yunqing's voice came out loud and clear. Wearing a pink brocade robe and a white cloak, Bai Yunqing strutted into the courtyard with 2 maids in a beautiful bun. Su Ziyu put down her chopsticks, took the handkerchief handed over by Lan Ji, and wiped her hands before slowly standing up. The 2 of them locked their eyes and saw clearly the pink clothes on Su Ziyu's body. Bai Yunqing's eyes were full of hidden misfortune. "Sister is so old, why do you still dress so frivolous?" Su Ziyu looked at her, but in just 2 or 8 years, she was wearing gold jewelry on her head and neck, regardless of whether it matched her clothes. Fortunately, that small face could be considered beautiful, and these pearl hairpins did not suppress the youthful aura on their bodies, only showing a slight exaggeration. Su Ziyu was too lazy to scold her. "Ah, yes, you're right. I'm already 18 this year, and I shamelessly dress as frivolous as my sister. I'm really..." Su Ziyu froze for a moment and then said, "I really don't know how to behave." Bai Yunqing frowned and sat down on the side without any hesitation. "What route did you take today? Why are you as creepy as a eunuch?" Su Ziyu rolled her eyes in front of her and said, "Tell me, what's the problem today?" Although Bai Luoyan and Bai Yunqing were at odds, Bai Yunqing's actions were also straightforward and he wouldn't easily find his mother even if he was punished. Therefore, although Bai Luoyan didn't like Bai Yunqing, he never dealt a harsh blow. "Today's ceasefire, this is the clothes my mother made for you to wear at the wedding banquet." Bai Yunqing raised her hand and the maid carried a tray forward. Su Ziyu looked at the crimson brocade dress, with gold threads pressed on the edges and exquisite patterns embroidered, and it looked like top-notch goods. "What's going on?" "I'm going to get married the day after tomorrow." Su Ziyu took a sip of tea. "Preparing this kind of clothes, isn't that sincere enough to make fun of me?" Fortunately, Bai Luoyan didn't see it, otherwise he would definitely feel uncomfortable in his heart. Although he said he wanted to let go, if emotions were really so easy to let go, how could there be so many love-hate notebooks in this world? Su Ziyu sighed and concluded that Bai Luoyan was just trying to hold on last night. But if you steal the bride's limelight, His Highness Prince Jing will definitely look at you with new eyes. Bai Yunqing was puzzled, and the simple structure in her mind made Su Ziyu couldn't help but look sideways. "You have no problem with your mind, right? Prince Jing's concubine was personally bestowed by the emperor. Do you want me to slap the emperor's face? When the time comes, I'll see which of us will lose our heads faster." Su Ziyu met Bai Luoyan for the first time and felt the pleasure of teasing pets as Bai Luoyan said. She was in a good mood. Your mother is so strict that she couldn't have made such a mistake. Tell me, where did you hide your clothes? After being guessed through, Bai Luoyan didn't get angry. He straightened his clothes, stood up, and walked out. His slender eyebrows raised, not hiding his malice at all. You prepare yourself, that set of clothes belongs to me. Although she knew that her own young lady was not uncommon, Lanji was still very angry. Miss C, you are simply deceiving others too much. Bai Luoyan forgave her rudeness and walked away with her head held high. Su Ziyu stared expressionlessly at Bai Luoyan's back and suddenly snorted, damn it. Watching Bai Luoyan's figure blur, Bai Luoyan flipped over and jumped off the wall. The three of them were all startled. Su Ziyu looked at Bai Luoyan's graceful figure. Today, she was wearing a moon-white robe with a white auspicious cloud pattern waistband, long hair tied high, and broken hair on her forehead swaying with the wind. Her facial features were exquisite and beautiful, and her lake blue eyes were filled with laughter. She was a young man of the Zhilan Yushu family. Pianpian Gongzi climbed over the wall. Why did you come so early? Su Ziyu picked up the confiscated meat buns and walked towards Bai Luoyan. Bai Luoyan was so scared by his dream last night that he couldn't wait to find Su Ziyu. Until this moment, the heart that had been hanging all along finally let go and reached out to take the steamed bun. Come over when you wake up, he said. The two of them moved naturally, revealing a familial affection, as if they had done it countless times. Guolan looked at the two of them and always felt strange. In the past, the two of them used to fight and frolic, just like siblings. Our young lady is usually quiet, but only when the prince comes over does she show a different kind of liveliness. But is this too lively? After finishing a bun, Bai Luoyan maliciously reached out and pinched Su Ziyu's face, leaving oil stains on her fair face. Bai Luoyan wiped it twice again, trying to wipe it clean. Su Ziyu's footsteps paused, her chest heaving violently a few times, and she took in deeper and deeper breaths. It's okay, it's okay. I just briefly lost my clean cheeks, but she lost her beloved man. Su Ziyu kept comforting herself, but her footsteps involuntarily stopped. Bai Luoyan stopped and looked at the two fingerprints on his face. She couldn't help but reflect on herself and came to the conclusion that she seemed to love watching Su Ziyu explode her hair. After enduring it for a while, Su Ziyu couldn't hold back. She reached out and pulled off the horse's tail, gritting her teeth, saying, "Don't rely on your madness to do whatever you want." Su Ziyu still believes that Bai Luoyan has not recovered from the incident of Su Ziki marrying his concubine. Bai Luoyan was pulled upside down and lightly swung out a sentence, "Your body will run out of hair later." Bald head, I still face the wind like a jade tree, said Su Ziyu, but she still relaxed her hand and wiped her face with the white smoke falling from her sleeve. Bai Luoyan didn't stop him. After finishing wiping, he pulled him into the house and said, "I'll tie your hair in a bun and go out for a walk later." As the capital of northern Qin, Anjing is undoubtedly bustling. The shouting on the street was incessant, with people coming and going, and traffic flowing in and out. The girls walking hand in hand, the maids carrying bags, and the young masters seeking pleasure are all kinds of lively. Su Ziyu was forced to put on a cloak, and Bai Luoyan tied his hair in a simple and elegant bun, with a plain face facing the sky, but couldn't resist the natural beauty. Bai Luoyan originally wanted to apply some rouge to someone, but was kicked hard before giving up. Bai Luoyan couldn't explain why he had to drag people out to play. She could feel that after being reborn, she became very strange. Is it due to the influence of androgens? She has nothing to do and just wants to tease Su Ziyu. Although she still has to coax herself after teasing, she still enjoys it. Perhaps it's better to make up for the psychological burden. Bai Luoyan looked at Su Ziyu as if he had seen through him again. As the seventh prince of northern Qin, Su Ziyu held a casual position as a queen, earning a monthly salary and living a carefree life. After all, everyone knows that the emperor will not allow a son with foreign bloodlines to succeed. However, there must be some rules in place. Su Ziyu was not allowed to enter the Imperial Academy to study, so the emperor sent another teacher from the Hanlin Academy to teach. However, this teacher was also a person with high vision. After finishing his boxing every day, he would come over and assign teaching tasks, and then disappeared all day. It's also difficult for Wang Hao, pretending to study and deal with spies every day. Bai Luoyan had no idea about this situation before, or rather she didn't pay much attention to it. It seems that everyone can ignore and despise him. After all, he is insignificant to this officialdom, even a cannon fodder. The feeling of pity is generated through brain stimulation. Bai Luoyan looked at the sugar figurine held by Su Ziyu and said, "If you want it, buy it." Su Ziyu was not polite and watched as Bai Luoyan paid, spending his own money on both sides. "There's a flower queen competition at Qinglou Tower tonight, do you want to go see it?" Bai Luoyan calmly invited. After all, in his past life, there were many interesting things happening there. Chapter 6. Qinglou. You are listening at novelfull.audio. As the sun sets in the west, Anjing is illuminated with a golden hue. Some street vendors have already started packing their things and heading home, while Qinglou Building has just started welcoming guests. Qinglou Tower is the largest amusement park in Anjing, where the girls come from all corners of the world, young and beautiful, with beautiful water. Bai Luoyan and Su Ziyu stood at the entrance of Qinglou Building, smelling the strong fragrance of powder before entering. Su Ziyu sneezed uncontrollably, not understanding why so many men like to come here. The few girls standing at the door hesitated whether or not to come forward to attract guests. After all, it was rare to bring women to the brothel. Bai Luoyan ignored them and walked in with Su Ziyu. "You must have never been here before, today I'll broaden your horizons." The sound of frolicking and Meng Lang in the building rushed towards her, and the girl was dressed lightly. Su Ziyu's eyes didn't even know where to put them, so she could only stare at the floor without looking back. On the other hand, Bai Luoyan looked like a fish in water. Su Ziyu couldn't help but speak up, "I think it's more appropriate for you to be this man." "If that's the case, I'm already a woman, so of course I'm at ease here." The madam warmly welcomed the person with white smoke, and her smile stiffened as she saw the person with white smoke. "Oh, this distinguished guest came to our place and brought his own girl," she said. Su Ziyu was startled by the sudden rush of people, wearing a big red flower on her head, a big red shirt, white powder on her face, and a mouth full of blood. A fragrant butterfly. Su Ziyu instinctively flashed behind Bai Luoyan. Bai Luoyan pulled down his wallet and handed it to him. "Please open a private room and serve some tea and dim sum. Don't be a girl." Su's mother weighed the weight of the money bag and smiled happily. "All right, young master, please come upstairs. Our flower queen competition will start soon." The elegant room is indeed elegant. Bai Luoyan looked at the layout and didn't know what methods were used. The sound insulation in this private room was actually quite good. Su Ziyu was curious about this place for the first time. "But I was afraid of seeing some unseen scenes, and I was so conflicted all the way." After finally arriving at the elegant room, the noise in her ears suddenly subsided, and Su Ziyu breathed a sigh of relief. "Have you been here before?" Bai Luoyan remained silent. She had really come before. In her past life, in order to help Su Ziki rise to power, she disguised herself as a man and entered such places countless times. But the past is the past, the present is the present. She denied it outright. "No, it's my first time here." The room was a bit stuffy, so Su Ziyu reached out and untied her cloak. "White falling smoke is good, of course it's not just about face." The silver chain at the waist hooks the beautiful waistline of the young girl. She has a good proportion, and the skirt can barely reach the toe of the shoe, making her whole figure slender. "Why don't you go down and dance with a sword?" Maybe this flower leader is you, Bai Luoyan joked casually. It was not appropriate to ask a young lady from an official family to compete with a woman from the wind and dust, as it was inappropriate to say so. But Su Ziyu just frowned and expressed disgust towards Bai Luoyan. It's shameless of you to praise yourself. But even if I win the sword dance, I'm not a real woman. This is called Bai Luoyan novel. Don't you think it's beneath your official status to compete on the same arena as them? Why? Su Ziyu was really confused. Is the official lady necessarily better? Bai Luoyan was stunned for a moment, then turned to laugh and said, "You're right. If you win, you won't be able to win." The servant brought up tea snacks, and drums could be heard downstairs. Bai Luoyan stood up and opened the window, revealing a clear view of the situation downstairs. Su's mother changed into big purple clothes, but she didn't pick the red flowers on her head. Holding a big red handkerchief in his hand, dancing and blushing all over his face. "Welcome to our Qinghwan Towers Huakue competition. It's a long night, accompanied by beautiful women. I hope you all have good food and drink. Tonight's choice is in your hands. The first night of the new Huakue is also waiting for everyone's sincerity." Mrs. Su's voice was sharp, and she was dancing with joy. Su Ziyu asked curiously, "Is chui very precious?" "But a man's chui can be given as he pleases." Bai Luoyan turned his head to look at him and sighed. Su Ziyu grew up in a temple since childhood and did not receive formal education, so she knew nothing about gender. This is indeed precious for some women because it is a symbol for the world to judge their loyalty. However, Ziyu, this does not prove anything. A woman's quality should not be judged by this. As long as she does not harm the heavens or reason and can abide by moral laws, it is her own business to do whatever she wants. Why did you suddenly become valuable? Su Ziyu also looked at her. I have never underestimated women. They should not be judged by me. I appreciate all those who work hard to live. Bai Luoyan looked at him quietly and opened his mouth with suspicion. Palace jade liquor. You're not allowed to drink. You're really a freak. You don't look like a person from this era at all. Bai Luoyan murmured softly as Su Ziyu smashed the peanut shell in his hand. There was a sudden commotion outside the door. What does it mean there's no private room? Didn't I call the servant in advance to make a reservation? The roaring sound from the door couldn't be stopped. This incompetent and furious roar. Bai Luoyan looked at the clattering door being knocked. Isn't this room usually reserved for me? Let the people inside get out. Master Lu, don't make things difficult for me. I can't afford to offend the distinguished guests here. The servant wiped the sweat off his forehead, and the bag of Bai Luoyan was given a golden leaf. Can you afford to offend our Lu family? Lu Qin glared angrily. All right, don't embarrass a servant either. You don't mind your status, said the voice behind me with a faint mockery. Lu Qin turned back and said, Prince, I didn't expect. All right, Su Zishuan interrupted, go and ask if it's possible to squeeze together with someone, and we'll pay. Su Zishuan, the fifth prince of the current dynasty, was conferred the title of Prince Qingwang. With single eyelids, a high nose bridge, and a black robe, he can be considered to stand tall and graceful. My birth mother was a female official who climbed onto the dragon bed while being drunk in the Holy Spirit. Later, she died due to difficulty giving birth to Su Zishuan. No one cares before the age of 5, it's a close call not to die. Later, the Lady Shufei in the palace was unable to conceive due to an accident, so she begged for grace to take Su Zishuan under her name and raise her. The Lu family is the largest imperial merchant in Anjing, and Lu Qin is just an illegitimate son. He has put in a lot of effort to make achievements in front of the head of the family, so he is respectful of Su Zishuan. I couldn't bear the command and turned around to knock on the door of the elegant room where Bai Luoyan was located. Do you want them to come in? Su Ziyu nodded dispensably, as if attracted by the dance below. Bai Luoyan took out a veil from somewhere and gestured for Su Ziyu to put it on before getting up and opening the door. His Highness, Prince Qi. Lu Qin's voice rose sharply and he quickly bowed with an arch. 7 younger brothers. Su Zishuan was also somewhat surprised. Bai Luoyan arched his hand and said, Brother Wu, do you want to come in and observe together? Su Zishuan was satisfied with his wit and nodded lightly. I never thought this was actually the 5th brother. That Wang would have the audacity to bother me. Although he said so, his actions showed no respect at all. Bai Luoyan rolled his eyes in the dark. If it weren't for the appearance of your loss of composure later on, who would have let you in? Su Zishuan was the first to walk inside, and Lu Qin quickly followed suit. Bai Luoyan shook his head and waved his hand to let the servant go down first. Your Highness Qi, why don't you have anyone to serve? Lu Qin turned around and wanted to call someone, but was stopped by Bai Luoyan in a tone that couldn't be refused. Sorry, I don't like outsiders serving me. Su Zishuan looked at Bai Luoyan's pretentious aloofness and didn't have a good breath. Yes, after all, 7th brother has only been back for a few years and hasn't had a good life. Of course, he doesn't know what enjoyment is. Lu Qin, don't be busy either. We can just follow the host. Bai Luoyan is not angry, after all, what others say is true. She walked straight towards the person covered by the window and brought them out. Before Su Ziyu could fully recover from the wonderful performance, she glared at Bai Luoyan and then bowed to the two without opening her mouth. Both of them were surprised, looking at Su Ziyu's tall figure and slender waist. Although the face is covered by a veil, the exposed eyes are very beautiful. The eyes are clear and translucent, with a round shape and a hook at the end of each eye, resembling a precious cat. You can tell from your attire that it's not a girl from the building. Looking at Bai Luoyan again, it is rumored that the mother of the 7th prince was once the first beauty of the Tulang tribe. Bai Luoyan had an indescribable sense of luxury on her body, and it did not seem like she had grown up in the wilderness. The facial features of the foreign people are already quite three-dimensional, and the 7th prince's facial features are mixed with the softness of the northern Qin dynasty. The peach petal-shaped eyes, however, have a pair of blue eyes, appearing gentle and affectionate. The two stood together, an indescribable match. Oh, I thought you really listened to the music. I didn't expect it to be hidden. Su Zishuan sat there in a dignified manner and raised his chin. But Lao Qi, you really are. How could there be any reason to bring girls here? Is there a rule that women are not allowed to come here? Su Ziyu usually dislikes Su Zishuan the most. Every day, he looks like a domineering dog, and really thinks he is being spoiled. Perhaps his disdain was too obvious in his tone, and Su Zishuan sneered, when did it take your turn to talk to me like this as a woman? Is there such a rule? Su Ziyu tiptoed up and leaned his face towards Bai Luoyan, indicating with his actions that he had not spoken to Su Zishuan. Bai Luoyan suppressed a smile and reached out to embrace Su Ziyu's waist. Don't make a fuss, can you still stand here with such regulations? Brother Wu, I understand. Xiaoyan is used to speaking frankly and has absolutely no intention of colliding with you. Bai Luoyan looked at Su Zishuan with a smile. Unexpectedly, it was Lu Qin who gave awesome and directly put people on the moral high ground. He said with a smile, King Qi doesn't need to care. His Royal Highness Qingwang is always generous and won't dispute with women. Su Zishuan's face turned black with a swoop, and his gaze fixed on Lu Qin with unfriendly expression. Bai Luoyan smiled and said, Thank you, Brother 5. Chapter 7. Watching a play. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. The atmosphere inside the room suddenly became a bit strange, but fortunately, the constant cheers from downstairs diverted our attention. With a white smoke probe, I saw petals swaying and falling all over the sky. A woman descended from the sky, her graceful figure wrapped in a red thin veil, her seductive fox eyes full of allure, and peony petals hanging from her forehead. With a smile on her face, she had a unique taste. Wearing a gold bracelet on her snow-white wrists, she danced lightly, holding onto a silk ribbon flying in the air, leaving behind a fragrant fragrance that captivated people. Su Ziyu was stunned when she saw it, and it took her a while to say, "How impressive. Do you like this one?" The two of them bit their ears as if there was no one around. "I don't know either," Su Ziyu frowned lightly and said bluntly, "I might like someone who looks good." Bai Luoyan chuckled lightly and said, "That's a coincidence, so am I." Xing'er. Su Zixuan suddenly approached, her eyes mesmerized, and murmured. 3 pairs of eyes turned, and Su Zixuan unconsciously took a few steps forward. Bai Luoyan pulled Su Ziyu aside with a flash of smoke. "What's the situation?" Su Ziyu was surprised. "That's his white moonlight." Bai Luoyan knew it was still a coincidence. However, their relationship had already developed to the point where you ran away and I chased after them. Taoxing was originally born by the palace maids and guards, but the palace maids abandoned the baby girl overnight. Coincidentally discovered by the nanny who took care of Su Zixuan, he was able to regain his life. The two grew up together, and Taoxing served Su Zixuan from a young age. However, for some unknown reason, Taoxing left the palace. In his past life, Su Zixuan's heroic act of winning the title of Zhengqianjin in Qinghua Tower has caused countless people to sigh. I don't know how Su Zixuan hurt people's hearts. What is white moonlight? Su Ziyu's question pulled back Bai Luoyan's thoughts. The white moonlight is someone who is unattainable. Has he ever been so humble? Shouldn't he have taken the route of force and plunder? As far as Su Ziyu knew, there were many women in Su Zixuan's backyard. Although none of them were stolen, it's hard to imagine Su Zixuan being so arrogant that he looks humble towards a woman. Bai Luoyan smiled and remained silent. No matter how wicked he is, he may have his own story. In the human heart, there must be some beauty to be preserved. Those who have principles will hold on, while those who lack perseverance will collapse. So how did you know? Su Ziyu reacted and looked at Bai Luoyan with suspicion. Do you care about me? Do you think all my expensive banquets were for nothing? After finishing the dance, the whole hall cheered. The ears were red and the neck was thick, grabbing and grabbing. I don't know if it's due to alcohol or people. Taoxing gasped for breath and shyly looked down at the audience, only to hear a frenzy of voices. Bai Luoyan quietly glanced at Su Zixuan, and as expected, his face turned red with anger. Sand. Dosha brainstorming to match the sound, Bai Luoyan was almost amused by himself. Pay attention to your image, don't laugh so lewdly. Su Ziyu tugged at her sleeve in dissatisfaction. What are you thinking? Laugh like this. Quick look. Bai Luoyan's eyes tilted to the side, indicating that someone should look over. Su Ziyu looked at Su Zixuan, whose eyes were red with anger, and a subtle sense of sympathy arose. Lu Qin. Su Zixuan shouted. I'm here, Prince. Lu Qin immediately stepped forward. I've arranged everything. Don't worry, Prince. No, you follow me to find the manager here. Su Zixuan turned around and left, completely losing his courtesy in a panic. Is this the good play you want to take me to see? Su Ziyu didn't agree. Isn't there anything good to watch? You wait a little longer, Bai Luoyan said with a mysterious expression on his face. 7 younger brothers are really interesting. Yejian next door suddenly leaned out, with a pair of auspicious phoenix eyes that were as tender as water, and a small mole at the end of the eyes that naturally became charming. He is not the 4th prince of the current dynasty, Su Ziyuan. Su Ziyuan, titled Prince Chen. Being brave and resourceful, caring for the people, is truly a noble character. His biological mother, Lady Higuifei, was also a favored figure in the 6 palaces. Her maternal grandfather was the Grand General of Xinghua, who accompanied the late emperor to battle on the battlefield and made sweat and blood contributions. If it weren't for the white smoke and a sideways thrust in the past life, then the throne Su Ziyuan would have been unwavering. A hand with distinct joints extended from behind and rested it on Su Ziyuan's shoulder, as if to prevent him from falling. Bai Luoyan looked at Su Ziyuan's face, the memories of his past life flashed by, and a thought came to his mind. Su Ziyu must not be able to sit in that seat. His temperament is not suitable for being detained in the court, and he should be dressed in fresh clothes, angry, and happy in the world. Among the emperor's sons, the mother clan of Su Ziyuan was powerful and had a dispute with Su Ziki. And Su Ziyuan should be a wise ruler. Thinking of this, Bai Luoyan raised a brilliant smile and said, "Why is fourth brother here too?" Su Ziyuan gave a tacit smile and said, "Why is seventh brother here too?" But the teacher doesn't listen well in class. Bai Luoyan's eyebrows twitched and she said, "Fourth brother, if that's the case, I'm just trying to seize the opportunity to showcase my beauty, right?" She tugged at Su Ziyu and they stood shoulder to shoulder. "You dare to say anything?" Su Ziyu was startled and lowered her voice. "Did you bring people and girls to such a place?" Su Ziyuan's expression was a bit difficult to express, and he smiled gently at Su Ziyu. "I don't know which families miss you are from. My cousin is rude, and I hope you can forgive me." Su Ziyu simply reached out and took off her veil, smiling at Su Ziyuan. "Little girl Bai Luoyan, I've seen His Highness Prince Chen before." With a strong force, she stepped on Bai Luoyan's foot. Su Ziyuan was stunned. He turned around to look at the person behind him who was protecting him, and then turned to look at Su Ziyu. "Miss Bai, are you? Can't you catch up with my second brother?" Su Ziyu forgot about this and blinked at Bai Luoyan. Bai Luoyan quietly moved his stepped foot and reached out to pinch Su Ziyu's waist. Su Ziyu's body swayed from being pinched, itchy and painful. "Fourth brother, be cautious. Second brother is going to marry Lady Bian. Xiao Yan's heart is almost shattered these days. Don't mention her sadness. And it has always been me pursuing Xiao Yan." Bai Luoyan's words were sincere, and Su Ziyu was startled for a moment. Originally planning to pat off Bai Luoyan's hand that pinched his waist, Su Ziyu then gently grasped it. Su Ziyu's mind was filled with thoughts of, Bai Luoyan's heart is about to break, and he didn't even care about his anger and said cautiously, "Why don't you tell me you're not happy?" Su Ziyuan was caught off guard by these words and said, "I'm sorry, Miss Bai, I was being rude." Su Ziyuan bowed, showing a gentlemanly demeanor. Su Ziyu shook her head and said, "It's not a problem. I want to continue asking Bai Luoyan, but I'm afraid her heart will break again." Su Ziyu was momentarily conflicted, and at that moment, a commotion came from downstairs. "Xing'er, you come with me." Su Zishuan went up to the stage and grabbed the person, ignoring the obstacles around him. Tao Xing stumbled when she was pulled, and in the moment she saw Su Zishuan clearly, her face turned pale and she struggled continuously, "You let go of me." Su's mother beside her was so anxious that she wanted to step forward but was stopped by someone. She had to shout in a gong-like voice, "Oh, young master, what are you doing? You're breaking the rules." Su Zishuan turned a deaf ear, and Su's mother's crowded hair fell off. "Her sales contract is with me, young master. You are robbing a commoner girl. If you don't stop, I will report to the government." "I don't think anyone dares." Lu Qin rushed up with his mansion guard, his face flushed with anxiety, and quickly handed his waist tag forward. "This is the current prince." Perhaps Lu Qin's words were too intimidating, and the scene instantly quieted down. Su Zishuan didn't stop Lu Qin for a moment. He just looked at Tao Xing with red eyes and said, "Why don't you come with me? Are you still unwilling to forgive me?" Tao Xing clenched her gripped wrist and said, "Prince, you've hurt me. Answer me." Su Zishuan roared. "I dare not. So I stopped struggling and Tao Xinghong stared stubbornly at Su Zixuan. Su Zixuan couldn't help but love her arrogant appearance. Her heart was filled with a violent desire, but she patiently lowered her posture and said, I've been looking for you all these years since you left. Are you still angry with me? What do I have to do to make you forgive me? What a big play. Is this inappropriate live talk book? The people in the audience changed their expressions and wished for a few more pots of small wine. Chapter 8. Dull. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This play is called The Overlord Prince and His Runaway Sweetheart, commented by Luoyan. How about it? Isn't it much better than a storybook? Su Ziyu nodded in approval, but was a bit puzzled. But how do I feel that Miss Xinger is a bit reluctant to refuse and still welcome her? This old five is a bit outrageous, Su Ziyuan interrupted the two, shaking the folding fan he took out from somewhere, with a smile on his lips that seemed uneasy and kind. He turned his head and ordered, You go and inadvertently reveal this matter to the emperor. Su Ziyuan's undisclosed behavior surprised Bai Luoyan, but he did not reflect deeply. Where is the prince speaking? When did I dare to be angry with the prince? Tao Xing no longer struggled and lowered her head, her voice tinged with a faint cry. Su Zixuan's heart softened and he gently embraced the person. How about walking with me? Peach's gaze flickered and he said, I am a woman of the world. How can I enter the prince's mansion? Why not? Su Zixuan tightened his hand and felt her boneless waist, his heart already beginning to wander. It's not interesting, Su Ziyu smacked her lips. It's similar to what's in a notebook, it's not innovative. Bai Luoyan shook his head in helplessness and said, Then I'll tell you something called Flowers and Bones. How about it? Do you want to hear it? Is this still popular at your esteemed women's banquets? Su Ziyu was skeptical, but her body had already turned and she pulled the person in. Tell me quickly. The next door was quiet, and Su Ziyuan smiled before turning and entering the room. Gu Jun brewed the tea and respectfully handed it to Su Ziyuan. He has slender knuckles, fair skin, and a cocoon tiger mouth, making him a pair of powerful hands. Su Ziyuan's gaze followed his hand and looked up. Gu Jun was wearing a black strong suit, with long hair and a high bouquet, sharp features, and a pair of deep and solemn black eyes. Su Ziyuan looked at that face and inexplicably felt that his mood had improved a lot. Gu Jun, what do you think? He took the tea and took a soft sip. I dare not speculate recklessly, Gu Jun clenched his fists and said steadily. Su Ziyuan looked up at him and said, If I ask you to say it, you can say it. Gu Jun frowned and after careful consideration, he directly spoke his heart, I think Prince Qi may be on our side. I think he may still be watching, Su Ziyuan shook his head. Although Su Ziyu is not favored, his mother's family is indeed a great help. Although the prestige of the 13 tribes is not as great as before, it should not be underestimated. How did you know, Lord, that King Qi didn't want that seat? He didn't aspire to this. If he hadn't been born in Anjing, he would have been the most carefree eagle on the grassland. Su Ziyuan's gaze widened and he sighed at the past. Gu Jun stopped speaking and looked at Su Ziyuan's tired expression, hesitating and saying, The Lord hasn't returned yet. You need to rest. Su Ziyuan poured himself another cup of tea and said, It's okay, take a break tomorrow. Gu Jun nodded and stopped persuading. On the contrary, Su Ziyuan was surprised and dissatisfied, saying, No, why don't you stop persuading? Gu Jun's always deep eyes flashed with a hint of smile, I dare not trespass. Su Ziyuan's gentlemanly demeanor was almost unstable, so he turned around and said, Okay, you've learned to be proud of your favor now. I'm very relieved. The street was a bit cool at night, and the white smoke tugged at Su Ziyu's cloak, Why don't you give it to me? I'm also cold. This was just a casual remark, but unexpectedly Su Ziyu stopped and turned his head to look at her seriously, while starting to untie his cloak. Is it really cold? Bai Luoyan looked at his posture and quickly held down his hand, tying it back for him. No, I'm not cold, he said. At the wedding banquet, you don't have to be too difficult on yourself. Just be honest. Breaking the shackles of human speech is the only way to do things freely. Bai Luoyan withdrew his hand and the two continued to move forward. Okay. Su Ziyu nodded and cautioned anxiously, if there's anything unhappy, you have to say it. If you hold on to it, there's still me behind you. As Bai Luoyan's heart warmed, he reached out and pulled the person into his arms. Ziyu, you are the most important person in my life. It's always different. Bai Luoyan looked at Su Ziyu, suppressing the inexplicable possessiveness in his heart. Su Ziyu was taken aback for a moment, then nodded in satisfaction and reached out to embrace her without feeling any problem. She raised her eyebrows and said, that's necessary. I don't blame this person for being cute and silly, with a smile in Bai Luoyan's eyes. Although Su Ziyu's mother Shinta Nala herself is passionate, she is ignorant about love affairs. Isn't it because the current emperor was looking at someone foolish that he had the idea of getting married? It's okay, always in one's own hands. Are you still afraid of being taken away? The person was sent back to the White Mansion, and Bai Luoyan took out the already written manuscript. Take a look at this first, and then you can freely unleash it. Su Ziyu looked at the manuscript stuffed into her hand and at Bai Luoyan with a firm gaze, and nodded solemnly. Returning to the royal mansion in the dark, Bai Luoyan quickly took a shower. Although she treated Su Ziyu one by one, when it came to herself, it was another matter. Although unable to see clearly under the dim candlelight, Bai Luoyan impressed Su Ziyu's figure with his hand feel. Tall, with long legs and flexible and powerful abdominal muscles, they are even exceptional compared to ordinary people. From the awkwardness and confusion of her first appearance to her current ease, Bai Luoyan even had the mood to think. I don't know if Su Ziyu or she will bear this thing in the future. She never thought of anyone other than Su Ziyu. Genius was hazy, and Bai Luoyan struggled to get up from bed. After a simple wash, I started running around the yard in circles. Su Ziyu has a good physical foundation and also helps with work in temples. She occasionally practices martial arts, but most of them are wild. In modern times, Bai Luoyan specialized in learning Sanda and Taekwondo. Although his memory was not very clear at that time, his desire to become stronger may have been too strong. Bai Luoyan put in a lot of effort to learn these things. I used to be weak and powerless, so I wanted to become strong. Wang Hao came over with a yawn to wake up, but unexpectedly saw the prince punching in the yard. Moreover, this boxing technique looks quite mysterious, as if it is both soft and firm, with a fierce but agile fist, and I couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Bai Luoyan devoted herself wholeheartedly to practicing martial arts, integrating Tai Chi into her techniques. Unexpectedly, she accidentally collided and created new sparks. Su Ziyu's internal strength is not shallow, but he cannot proficiently use it for a while. As soon as I withdrew my fist, I saw Wang Hao beside me. Immediately called the person over. Although Wang Hao is not very old, his martial arts skills are difficult to match among his peers. Come on, you accompany me to practice. Wang Hao stepped forward according to his words. When did the prince learn the new martial arts? Stop talking nonsense, hurry up. Bai Luoyan put on a posture. Wang Hao has been holding back his hands and fighting. He used to do this when he was called over to practice, but this time he seems a bit overwhelmed. Bai Luoyan's martial arts are unpredictable. Not only her martial arts, but also her leg skills are powerful, with all her moves hitting the front door. Wang Hao had to take it seriously. The two of them came and went, and it was difficult to determine the winner for a while. In the end, Bai Luoyan was defeated and didn't care about his demeanor. He sat panting on the ground. Happy. Bai Luoyan smiled boldly. Wang Hao also smiled and looked quite pleased. The prince has made great progress, he said. Did I not make any progress before? Bai Luoyan asked curiously. It seems that the prince didn't like practicing martial arts very much before. Your foundation is still something that the empress forced you to practice before. Wang Hao has always been sincere, and when asked this question, he replied, later, the empress left without anyone to teach you, so you became lazy. I'm afraid I'll be sad, Bai Luoyan thought and sighed, holding her hands behind her and looking up at the sky. In her past life, Su Ziyu rarely expressed herself, and Bai Luoyan once again focused on Su Ziki. Looking back now, he may not have even had a confidant at the time. A person who is too pure and sensible, shattered the ground without anyone noticing. Chapter 9. Silver Goose Pavilion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After finishing breakfast, Bai Luoyan changed into a new outfit. Once, after all, she was a girl, and Bai Luoyan also loved to tease herself. Now that he has become a man, the white smoke has also become somewhat restrained. She wore black clothes today, with a silver embroidered eagle at the hem. The dark red waistband is embroidered with cloud and thunder patterns, and there is a white jade pendant hanging on it, which appears introverted but actually bold. Bai Luoyan looked at his attire with satisfaction and shook the folding fan as he walked out the door. Her purpose of this trip is very clear, heading straight to the contact point of Yinyan Pavilion. Establishing the Silver Goose Pavilion can be considered an unintentional move by Bai Luoyan. Shen Wan, the mother of Bai Luoyan, comes from Jiangnan and is a gentle and kind person. The Shen family was originally considered a wealthy family in Jiangnan, and they had a bodhisattva-like heart in handling people and affairs, helping many poor families. However, fate played tricks on people, and a flood washed away everything. Shen Wan got separated from her family and headed north to Anjing. Shen Wanqing's beauty and demeanor are impeccable. Although running around all the way made her haggard, the beauty was in her bones and she was immediately spotted upon entering Anjing. The tooth dealer tied someone up and sold them to Qinghuan Tower, and Shen Wan was completely trapped from then on until she met Bai Zhan. At that time, Bai Zhan had some fame and was tricked by a friend into coming to this Qinghuan building. Red-faced and red-eared, but also disturbed by Shen Wan's dance. Later on, things became cliché. Bai Zhanben, an extremely rigid person, surprisingly took Shen Wan home under the pressure of his family. Shen Wan was naturally delighted, but as Bai Zhan rose all the way, Shen Wan became a stain on his career. How could friendship be worth fame and fortune? Shen Wan came to the Bai family and saved a lot of silver during the years of being favored, helping many poor beggars. Later on, Shen Wan passed away, but Bai Luoyan was deeply influenced from a young age and did not forget to provide relief to these people even with money. But giving money cannot solve the fundamental problem, so Bai Luoyan simply paid to open a restaurant and solved the survival problems of those beggars. Later on, the situation in the court became increasingly mysterious. In order to help Su Ziki, Bai Luoyan simply invited someone to teach him martial arts, and the Silver Goose Pavilion gradually grew stronger. The Silver Goose Pavilion has a total of 6 departments, with the commercial department being the longest established and the foundation for its rise, responsible for finance. The intelligence department is the largest in scale and has the largest number of personnel, with spies scattered throughout the country. The dark side is mostly the assassin of secret operations, while the military side is the strongest force of the Silver Wild Goose Pavilion, and both are the strong pillars of the Silver Wild Goose Pavilion. There is no need to say much about the Zhangxing Tang. After the Silver Goose Pavilion fell into the hands of Su Ziki in the previous life, the Zhangxing Tang was the first to be baptized by blood, and various forms of torture were carried out, becoming a target of public condemnation. Finally, there was the College of Colleagues, all of whom were carefully recruited by Bai Luoyan to help Su Ziki rise to power. In the past life, the rank of officials and scholars was almost corrupt to the point of being invisible. Nowadays, Suzuki's influence has not yet penetrated into the interior of the Silver Wild Goose Pavilion, and there is still a chance to save everything. With such thoughts in mind, Bai Luoyan entered the restaurant and sat down in a secluded corner. The waiter quickly walked up with tea and greeted him while pouring water. "What would you like to eat, sir?" "A bowl of saucy noodles, don't add scallions." "All right." The waiter shook his handkerchief and walked down in a daze. Bai Luoyan dug into his sleeve and pulled out a gold ring. Vulgarity is a bit vulgar, but Bai Luoyan pushed the ring into the middle finger. When the waiter came over holding his face, Bai Luoyan's hand with a ring was placed on the table, and his fingers were tapping the table repeatedly. At the moment when he saw the ring clearly, the waiter's pupils shrank, and the expression on his face became even more respectful. "Do you know it or not?" The waiter lowered his voice and asked by placing his face. Bai Luoyan calmly took his face and said, "No, no, no." The waiter looked solemn and said, "May I ask if the young master has sent you?" Bai Luoyan nodded and took a big bite of saucy noodles. "Take me to meet your manager. You go west for 3 miles, then go inside at the intersection of Jidong Lane and Ziku. It's the second to last house, knock on the door and take a 3 breath before knocking." Bai Luoyan nodded and said, "I understand. You can go ahead and get busy." After finishing the noodles, Bai Luoyan got up and walked out. Without riding a horse, I wandered all the way to the entrance of the alley. This place is sparsely populated, mostly consisting of impoverished families. Bai Luoyan carried his skirt and walked in, turning left and right all the way. Following the waiter's words, he knocked on the door and soon someone came to open it. The newcomer had a beard all over his face, was 5 big and 3 thick, and was dressed in coarse linen clothes. He was indeed polite to people. "I dare ask who the young master is looking for?" Bai Luoyan bowed back and said, "I'm looking for you, Mr. Xue." Mr. Xue is the person arranged by Bai Luoyan to take care of the Silver Wild Goose Pavilion. He is diligent, intelligent, down-to-earth, and capable, and is Bai Luoyan's right-hand man. The Silver Goose Pavilion originally started in Anjing, and although it has now expanded to various regions, its roots are still rooted in Anjing. At present, this room looks dilapidated outside, but inside it there is a different world. Perhaps from a poor family background, the houses here are not built extravagantly. Compared to luxurious mansions and courtyards, this place appears more upscale. Without carved beams and painted rafters, they are all built of cairns, clean and elegant. The yard was filled with a faint fragrance of osmanthus, and a few scattered maids were sweeping the floor. Bai Luoyan followed his beard and was taken into the study, winding and twisting all the way. Mr. Xue's full name is Xue Qinglou, and he is only in his 30s now. Her eyebrows and eyes were soft, and she carried a refined aura. He was wearing a gray-white robe, and his long hair was simply tied up with a wooden hairpin. The clear breeze thins the spine, preferring to bend rather than bend. The door of the study was closed, and Bai Luoyan looked at Xue Qinglou, who was bowing down to write. He bowed and shouted, "Mr. Xue." Xue Qinglou looked up and was somewhat surprised to see the visitor, but he still put down his brush and received the gift of Bai Luoyan. "I dare to ask the young master, but what orders does the master have?" "Yes," Bai Luoyan stood up without laying any groundwork. He opened the door to the world and said, "The Lord wants you to find the meticulous work sent by Suzuki within half a month." "Is this really what the Lord means?" Xue Qinglou frowned. Although he didn't like Suzuki, he still asked, "Did the Lord say before that the Silver Goose Pavilion was built for Prince Jing?" Bai Luoyan was not in a hurry either. "Do you know, sir, that Prince Jing is going to marry his concubine?" Xue Qinglou's eyes widened, his attitude changed, and he became serious. "I will definitely find out everything within 10 days. After finding out, don't startle the snake with grass," Bai Luoyan instructed. After Suzuki's wedding banquet, recall the leaders of the 6 tribes. The Lord has something to instruct. Yes. After not waiting for a long time, Bai Luoyan ordered him to leave. The sound of hawking along the way was so loud that Bai Luoyan bought some tomatoes on sticks and went to Bai mansion. Climbing over the wall neatly, I saw the courtyard quiet. Looking up at the sky, he muttered in a low voice, "Can't you? It hasn't gotten up yet." Sneaking into the bedroom, he pushed the door and met Guolan's anxious gaze. Bai Luoyan felt a thud in his heart and said, "Where's your young lady?" Guolan's tears streamed out with a splash and she knelt down. "I beg the prince to save our young lady. She has been taken away by the people in the ladies' room." "Don't worry, first tell me what happened." Bai Luoyan squatted down to help the person up. Although Guolan was sobbing incessantly, fortunately she spoke logically. Today was supposed to be the day when the young lady served her breakfast, but the young lady overslept and woke up late. The young lady decided that the young lady was deviant from tradition and didn't like her as the head of the household. She was about to punish the young lady. Bai Luoyan frowned, put the tomatoes on sticks in his hand to Guolan. "You stay here, I'll go and have a look." Chapter 10. Punishments. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Su Ziyu never expected that sleeping in would also suffer. At this moment, being pressed down and kneeling on the ground, the mother of the Bai family, Zhu Wanyu, sat upright on the main seat, sipping a cup of tea calmly and leisurely in her hand. The royal blue brocade robe is elegant and atmospheric, paired with silver jewelry and white jade, giving it a touch of freshness and elegance. With the traces of time on his face, there is a faint blush, and his slightly plump figure is also round and smooth. With the momentum of being the head of the household, she furrowed her brows and remained calm and confident. "Yener, do you know what's wrong? The Bai family is the most particular about etiquette, hierarchy, and the 3 virtues and 5 constants. As the Minister of Rites, Bai Zhan often adhered to the principle of leading by example and treated his children with strictness, wishing to engrave secular etiquette into his bones. Therefore, the children of the Bai family are almost always praised as role models outside, except for Bai Luoyan. Despite the woman's reputation, Bai Luoyan chased after Su Ziki. She had been beaten and scolded before, but she had not been discouraged. She had copied books thousands of times, but she showed no signs of repentance. On both sides, she had overslept. Su Ziyu broke free from her imprisoned hand and honestly performed a big salute. Yener knows her mistake and earnestly requests her mother to punish her. Zhu Wanyu nodded with satisfaction and raised her voice, "Someone, palm your hand for 20. Su Ziyu raised her head fiercely and said, "Mother is confused. It's not like this punishment in family rules. The Bai family strictly adheres to the principle of being physically and mentally responsible, accepting parents. As long as it is not an unforgivable mistake, it is basically impossible to be punished." Before Bai Luoyan pursued Su Ziki, he only received the heaviest punishment of 10 palm hits. "Who told you it was just this matter?" Zhu Wanyu looked up and glanced at Zhang Mama who was waiting beside her. The other person nodded in understanding and quickly walked out. Not long after, she walked in with a purple dress covered in mud. Zhang Mama placed the tray in front of Su Ziyu and said, "Miss San, do you still look familiar?" Su Ziyu frowned and quickly pondered. "Your outfit belongs to me now." A loud voice rushed out, and Su Ziyu couldn't help but widen her eyes. "Bai Yunqing." Su Ziyu lowered her head and said, "Z. Yen Er doesn't know what grandma is saying." "How could you not know? Take a good look at the dress that you smashed into such a mess. Madam regards you as her own and personally chooses the dress for you, so that you can attend the wedding banquet with dignity. How could you be so unscrupulous? Just throw it away if you want." "I don't have it. I've never seen this dress before, how can I throw it away?" Su Ziyu's anger burned in her heart. Who would have thought that the brainless Bai Yunqing would also give him a hand? "I personally delivered it to the girls' room. Third miss, don't argue anymore." Grandma Zhang folded her hands in front of her, not suppressing her proud eyebrows. Pretty Su Ziyu sighed in her heart, saying that Bai Yuanqing didn't have that brain. It turned out that this person was the one who caused it. Luoyan, you shouldn't be capricious. Zhu Wanyu sat back in the main seat, looking high and mighty. Mother said I threw it, do you have evidence? Su Ziyu straightened her waist and looked straight into Zhu Wanyu's eyes as she watched the two maids come to execute. Zhu Wanyu sneered at Su Ziyu, waved her hand, and immediately someone closed the door. How could Su Ziyu not understand? My heart immediately cooled down. Angry in my heart, I cursed my mother without knowing how I had provoked others. The strength of the two maids was astonishing, and Su Ziyu was firmly restrained, struggling to no avail. Grandma Zhang held the wooden board and waved it mercilessly. Su Ziyu's face turned white in an instant, but she still held back the pain and didn't let out a sound. You're done, remember to lock the door when you sleep at night, she said with a fierce smile as she stared at Grandma Zhang with both eyes. Zhang Mama was startled and her hands became harder and harder. In front of herself, Zhu Wanyu dared to threaten others, but her face couldn't hold back. White smoke. I see all the etiquette you learned has been fed into the dog's stomach. Zhang Mama is also your elder. How could you speak so rudely? The palms were swollen and blood seeped out, and Su Ziyu's eyes were red with pain. Upon hearing this, she sneered, I think you're confused. If you say that, I'm the master and she's a servant, she'll have to endure no matter what I say or do. You are so rebellious. Zhu Wanyu stood up angrily. Zhang Mama is from my room, and if you disrespect her, you disrespect me. What's the noise? Open the door. A powerful voice came from outside the door, and a hint of panic flashed on Zhu Wanyu's face. She quickly got up and straightened her clothes. Bai Zhan walked in with a calm face and said, What's going on so early in the morning? It's not proper. Zhu Wanyu bowed with a smile and said, Master, I am following the proper rules of Yener. Bai Zhan frowned so much that he could strangle a fly. Who asked you to do it? What big mistake did she make? Master, you don't know, Yen Er. She's simply disrespectful. Zhu Wanyu picked up her handkerchief and touched the corner of her eyes. Zhang Mama, who had already finished the fight, naturally took on the conversation, adding fuel and vinegar to what had just happened. Su Ziyu gently moved her fingers, the pain was unbearable. Without even thinking about it, she choked back and said, My mother is truly the head of the family. This black thing can be said to be white. How could you be so impolite? Don't you think I'm the father in your eyes? Bai Zhan patted the table and looked straight at Su Ziyu. Su Ziyu was scolded for a moment, he was completely at a loss for Master Zhang Er. He didn't expect Bai Zhan to focus so well. After realizing it, he restrained his temper and saluted, but surprisingly, the person still didn't buy it. In this situation, are you kneeling and bowing to me? Are you trying to ruin my life? Su Ziyu's mentality was about to explode, so how could that be? How about I give you a few more snacks? Can you give it a few more years? You. Bai Zhanshua stood up, you rebellious girl. It's time for your mother to teach you the rules well. Su Ziyu was not afraid either. He stood up with a stiff neck, but his gaze turned straight to Zhang Mama beside him. I dare ask Zhang Mama, when did she give me clothes yesterday? Can I accept them on the spot? Yener, are you still unwilling to admit it at this time? Zhu Wanyu said earnestly, looking like a good mother. Answer me. Su Ziyu ignored Zhu Wanyu and looked at Zhang Mama with a fierce expression in her eyes. Zhang Mama felt uncomfortable being stared at and quickly dodged her gaze, making a reminiscent look. Last night. Shenshi, Miss San personally accepted it. Are you sure, Mama? Su Ziyu raised her voice. I. Grandma Zhang's forehead oozed some sweat, I'm sure. Last night at Shenshi, I accompanied Prince Qi on a stroll outside. Zhang Mama, you must have seen a ghost. Miss San, don't laugh anymore. How could Prince Qi be with you, whispered Mama Zhang. How do you know she's just joking? Bai Luoyan walked slowly, shaking her fan, ignoring the autumn sky. Prince Qi, be safe. Zhu Wanyu quickly bowed with the female relatives present, and Bai Zhan stood up with a stern attitude to greet him. I've seen Prince Qi. Standing inside the room, seeing Su Ziyu's injured hand, the smile in his eyes disappeared completely. Pai Xiao nodded at Bai Zhan without a smile and said, Bai, you don't need to be polite. I just heard you discussing the matter of falling smoke, but I asked her out yesterday to delay her work. It shouldn't be. Bai Luoyan didn't give anyone a chance to interrupt, and the paper fan in his hand tapped his palm repeatedly. Luoyan is the third miss of the Bai family. Does she still need to do servant work in your house? Prince, you misunderstood. Zhu Wanyu smiled awkwardly, this is just a rule of our Bai family. Coming to serve our parents' meals is a tradition passed down from our ancestors. The Bai family's teachings are indeed impressive, and they were punished so severely. The corner of her mouth stiffened with a smile, and Zhu Wanyu lowered her eyes and said with a bitter smile, the prince doesn't know anything. This Bai Luoyan is disrespectful and has no rules. If she doesn't suffer a bit, she may not have a good memory.